The morning of June 28, 1830, rises cold and damp over the rolling hills of Colesville, New York. Along the banks of a small, unnamed stream, a group of men and women stand in silence, their shoes sinking into the soft, dark mud of the upstate wilderness. The night before, a hostile mob had descended upon this quiet valley, tearing down the wooden dam that Joseph Smith and his companions had painstakingly constructed to create a baptismal pool. Undeterred by the destruction and the lingering threat of violence, the small band of believers has spent the early dawn hours rebuilding the barrier, placing heavy logs and stones against the rushing current until the water pools deep enough for immersion. A crowd of jeering spectators has already gathered on the opposite bank, their faces twisted with anger, their shouts of derision cutting through the quiet morning air. Among the believers stands Emma Hale Smith, 26 years old, her shoulders wrapped in a simple shawl, her eyes fixed on the muddy water. She has left behind her parents, her comfortable family home, and the social standing of her youth to marry a young, unlearned seer who possesses little more than a gold record and a calling from the heavens. She steps forward, her boots squelching in the wet earth, and places her hand in his as they descend together into the freezing current. Emma does not know on this June morning that within a few short years she will bury 4 of her infant children in the shallow soil of Ohio and Missouri. She does not know that she will cross the frozen, treacherous expanse of the Mississippi River on foot in the dead of winter, carrying her surviving babies clung to her skirts while her husband languishes in a cold stone dungeon. She does not know the sheer physical, emotional, and social toll that this single step into the Colesville water will exact from her life over the next 14 years, culminating in a blood-splattered jail cell in Carthage. She has no map, no strategic plan, no written guarantee of safety, and no foreknowledge of the heavy cross she is about to carry. She possesses only a quiet, burning witness of the Holy Ghost that the words spoken by her husband are the truth of eternity, and that the heavens have indeed opened once more to the earth. With that single, incomplete piece of information, she closes her eyes, submits to the water, and says her first monumental yes to the restoration. This is not just history. This is the exact pattern of your life. Right now, you are standing on the edge of your own cold water, looking out at an uncertain future and demanding that God show you the entire road before you take the first step. You are waiting for complete information, waiting for the bank account to be perfectly secure, waiting for your family to understand and approve, waiting for the path to be entirely cleared of mobs and obstacles before you commit your heart to the calling you feel burning inside you. You have convinced yourself that this hesitation is wisdom, that your delay is actually preparation, and that it is only reasonable to demand a full accounting of the cost before you sign your name to the covenant. But the history of the restoration screams a different truth across the centuries to your weary soul. Every single brick of the kingdom of God was laid by hands that stepped forward in the dark. The great work of the gathering was not built by people who had a detailed 5-year plan. It was built by ordinary men and women who were given just enough light to see where to place their feet for one single step, and who had the spiritual grit to take that step before they knew what lay beyond the horizon. Your demand for certainty is not a sign of your maturity. It is the very anchor that is keeping you bound to the shore while the current of God's purposes moves on without you. In this quiet, heavy season of your life, the enemy of your soul has been whispering a highly sophisticated lie into your ear, designed specifically to paralyze your divine assignment. He has been telling you that if you cannot see the end of the road, it means God has not actually spoken to you. The whisper tells you that a real call from the heavens would come with absolute clarity, with open doors, with immediate resources, and with a smooth, predictable path to success. The voice tells you that because you feel confused, because you cannot see how the bills will be paid, or how your relationships will survive the shift, you must wait until everything makes sense. This is the great deception of the adversary, to make you believe that the absence of a complete map is the same thing as the absence of God's presence. He wants you to believe that you are being reckless if you step forward with only a witness of the Spirit, and that you are being holy by remaining frozen in place until you have absolute control over your circumstances. This whisper has kept you analyzing, planning, and hesitating, turning what should be a dynamic journey of faith into a stagnant valley of indecision. You have been waiting for God to show you the destination, while God is waiting for you to show Him your willingness to walk through the mist. Look back across the centuries to the winter of 1830, when the call came to the tiny, struggling branches of the church in New York to pack up their entire existence and gather to a place called Ohio. Consider the weight of that command on a man like Edward Partridge, a highly respected and prosperous hatter living in Painesville, Ohio. He was a man of cold logic and deep caution, sent by his neighbors to New York to investigate this new Golden Bible and the young prophet who claimed to translate it. When Edward arrived in Fayette, he did not find a grand cathedral or a wealthy, secure establishment. He found a family of poor farmers living in a small log cabin, surrounded by poverty, legal battles, and intense local derision. He had every earthly reason to turn back, to return to his comfortable business, and to write the entire movement off as a passing delusion of the uneducated. Yet, as he listened to Joseph Smith preach, and as he felt the quiet, undeniable vibration of the truth in his own chest, he did not demand a guarantee of safety or a promise of financial return. He did not ask Joseph if he would ever be driven from his home or if his children would have to sleep in the mud. He simply stepped forward into the waters of baptism on December 11, 1830, saying yes to the meager light he possessed. Edward Partridge had no way of knowing that this simple yes would cost him his business, his health, and eventually his very life. He did not know that within 3 years, he would be dragged onto the public square of Independence, Missouri, by an angry mob, stripped of his clothing, and covered from head to foot with boiling tar and feathers because he refused to deny the truth he had found. He did not know that he would stand as the first bishop of the church, carrying the agonizing financial and physical burdens of thousands of impoverished saints who had been driven from their homes in the dead of winter. He did not know that the sheer physical exposure and relentless stress of those persecutions would wear his body down to the point of a premature death at the age of 46. If God had shown Edward Partridge a vivid, detailed picture of that Missouri square, of the boiling tar, of the crying children, and of his own early grave on the day of his baptism, his mortal frame might have shriveled in terror. But God, in his infinite mercy and wisdom, did not show him the cost. He showed him only the truth of the Book of Mormon and the beauty of the restored gospel. He gave him just enough light to see that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and that light was sufficient for Edward to say his first, unhesitating yes. Think of the Colesville branch, that small group of believers who built the dam in the mud of June 1830. When they packed their wagons in the spring of 1831 to move to Ohio, and then almost immediately were commanded to journey nearly 1,000 miles further to the raw, wild frontier of Jackson County, Missouri, they did not have a road map or an insurance policy. They were farmers, mothers, weavers, and children, traveling by water and by land, carrying their sick, their elderly, and their faith. When they arrived in Missouri, they did not find a built-up Zion with comfortable homes and paved streets. They found a wilderness of prairie grass and hostile neighbors. They immediately went to work, cutting down trees, building rough cabins, and planting crops in the unbroken sod, believing they were building a permanent home for their families. They said yes to the labor of building Zion, completely unaware that within 2 years, armed men would ride through their settlements, burning their homes, destroying their crops, and driving them across the freezing Missouri River into the wild woods of Clay County. They discovered the immense, shattering cost of their discipleship in real time, mile by mile, tear by tear, and sacrifice by sacrifice. Yet, if you could stand in those cold Missouri camps in the winter of 1833, among the shivering women and the hollow-eyed men who had lost everything they owned, you would not hear them crying out that they had been deceived. You would not hear them demanding their old lives back in New York or lamenting the day they ever heard the name of Joseph Smith. Why? Because they had discovered a profound spiritual law that the modern world has largely forgotten. The yes must always precede the full revelation of the cost, and the power to pay that cost is only given to you after you have entered the path. They understood that if they had waited for a complete guarantee of comfort, safety, and prosperity before they gathered, they would have remained in New York, safe in their physical bodies but utterly dead to the glorious spiritual realities that were being unfolded upon the earth. They chose the cold riverbanks of Missouri with the presence of God over the warm, comfortable hearths of New York without him. They chose to pay the cost as they went, because they knew that the currency of their sacrifice was buying them an inheritance in a kingdom that could never be shaken by the mobs of mortality. This is the great, eternal principle that Joseph Smith himself had to learn through years of raw, unrelenting experience, a principle that was finally codified into the very canon of our faith during the darkest hours of his prophetic ministry. In March of 1839, Joseph lay on the cold, straw-covered stone floor of Liberty Jail, a subterranean dungeon where the ceiling was so low he could not fully stand upright, and where the air was so thick with toxic smoke and the stench of human waste that he and his companions could barely breathe. He had been there for 4 months, listening to the agonizing reports of his people, the women, the children, the elderly, being driven out of the state of Missouri in the dead of winter under the threat of extermination by the state militia. From the depths of that human hell, Joseph cried out to the heavens, demanding to know where God was and why the hand of the Almighty was stayed. And in the midst of that silence, as he poured out his raw, unvarnished grief, the voice of the Lord came to him, not with an explanation of why the suffering was allowed, and not with a detailed map of how they would escape, but with an instruction of pure, unadulterated faith. In the 17th verse of the 123rd section of the Doctrine and Covenants, recorded from the damp floor of that very prison, the Lord spoke words that must become the absolute foundation of your life in this hour. Therefore, dearly beloved brethren, let us cheerfully do all things that lie in our power, and then may we stand still with the utmost assurance to see the salvation of God, and for his arm to be revealed. Do you hear the divine order of those words? The Lord did not say, "Wait until I reveal my arm, and then cheerfully step forward." He did not say, "Wait until I show you the salvation, and then do what lies in your power." The command is to cheerfully do all things that lie in your power first, with the limited strength, the limited light, and the incomplete information you possess today. The standing still, the assurance, the vision of salvation, and the raw revelation of God's miraculous arm only come after you have exhausted your own power in the dark. The yes is your job, the revelation of the cost, the provision of the strength, and the ultimate victory are entirely His. This truth is crashing into your life right now because you have been trying to reverse this divine order. You have been telling God, "Show me how the story ends. Show me how my children will be taken care of. Show me how my reputation will be protected. Show me where the resources will come from, and then I will cheerfully say yes to your call." But God is saying to you, say yes to the light you have today. Step into the water while the mob is still shouting on the bank. Do the small, hard things that lie in your power right now, and then stand still and watch me part the Red Sea of your life. Your demand for complete information is actually a subtle form of pride, a desire to remain the master of your own destiny, to maintain control over the outcomes, and to avoid the absolute vulnerability that true faith requires. You want to walk by sight while claiming to live by faith, but those two realms can never occupy the same space. You must decide whether you want the safety of the shore or the power of the deep, and that decision can only be made by a yes uttered in the absence of sight. If God were to show you right now the full extent of what He is going to ask of you over the next 10, 20, or 30 years, you would shrink back in terror. If He showed you the relationships you will have to let go of, the comforts you will have to sacrifice, the deep, dark valleys of grief you will have to walk through, and the sheer magnitude of the spiritual warfare you will have to wage, your mortal mind would scream that you are not capable of carrying such a burden. And your mind would be correct, you are not capable of carrying it today. The person you are right now, standing on the bank of the river, does not possess the spiritual capacity, the emotional endurance, or the raw character required to pay the cost of your ultimate destiny. But the beauty of the restoration is that the path itself is the crucible of your transformation. The very act of saying yes to the first step releases a measure of grace that changes your nature, preparing you for the second step. By the time you reach the heavy, agonizing hills of your personal Missouri, you will no longer be the timid, hesitant person who stood on the banks of Colesville. You will have been forged by the journey, tempered by the fire, and filled with a supernatural strength that will make the heaviest cost feel like a light affliction. The hesitation you have been indulging in is not protecting you. It is actively delaying your transformation. Every day you spend waiting for complete information is a day you are denying yourself the spiritual growth that can only occur on the road. You have been looking at your current lack of resources, your current lack of knowledge, and your current lack of support as proof that you are not ready to step forward. But the early saints did not have the resources either. They did not have the printing presses, the temples, the missionary system, or the worldwide organization when they said yes to the Book of Mormon. They had only a testimony that drove them to build temples out of their poverty, to quarry massive stones with their bare hands while their families lived in tents, and to leave their wives and children in malaria-ridden swamps to preach the gospel across the oceans without purse or scrip. They did not wait for the resources to appear before they began to build. They began to build, and the resources were created out of the very fabric of their obedience. The provision is always hidden inside the step of faith. You must recognize that you carry the exact same spiritual lineage as those early pioneers of the Restoration. You are not a spectator in this final dispensation, sent to merely admire the faith of those who went before you. You are a continuation of their work. You have been placed on the earth in the specific hour because you possess the same capacity for an unhesitating, world-altering yes that lived in the chests of Emma Smith, Edward Partridge, and Parley P. Pratt. You are a chosen vessel, designed by the hand of the Father to step into the dark, to break through the generational patterns of fear and hesitation that have held your family line captive for decades, and to pioneer a new path of spiritual power for those who will follow you. Your life is meant to be a living monument to the reality of a God who still speaks, who still directs, and who still honors the covenant of those who trust him with their whole heart. But that monument cannot be built out of the dry clay of your hesitation. It must be forged in the wet mud of your immediate, cheerful obedience. Stop waiting for the storm to clear before you launch your boat. Stop waiting for the doubts of your friends and family to subside before you declare your allegiance to the truth you have felt. Stop waiting for a detailed, itemized bill of the cost before you commit your soul to the altar. The light you have right now, that quiet, burning, undeniable witness that has kept you watching this video, that has kept you searching the scriptures, that has kept your heart soft when everything around you was turning to stone, that light is enough. It is not enough to show you the end of your life, but it is more than enough to show you the very next step you need to take. You know what that step is. You know the conversation you need to have, the habit you need to break, the offering you need to make, the commitment you need to seal, or the path you need to walk down. Do not let another sun go down on your indecision. Step into the cold water. Let the spectators shout their insults. Let the future remain wrapped in the mystery of God's providence. And let your voice rise with the quiet, terrifying, and beautiful clarity of a soul that has decided to trust the Creator of the universe. The time for analysis has passed. The time for delay has expired. The angels of the Restoration are leaning over the battlements of heaven, watching to see if the chosen ones of this generation will have the courage to repeat the pattern of the past. They are waiting for your yes, not a conditional yes, not a yes with strings attached, but a raw, unreserved, and joyful yes to whatever the Father requires of you. The path of the covenant is open before you, and though it is lined with the crosses of those who have sacrificed everything, it is also illuminated by the glory of the resurrected Christ, who has already walked every mile of the road and who stands at the end of it, waiting to crown your faith with his presence. Cheerfully do all that lies in your power this very day. Lay down your demand for sight, pick up your shield of faith, and step forward into the glorious, unpredictable, and wholly unknown. I say yes to what I can see right now. I do not wait for complete information. I have enough light for the next step. I take it. I release the need to control the outcome, and I place my trust entirely in the author of the plan. My waiting is over, and my movement has begun. I cheerfully do all that lies in my power today, confident that the arm of God will be revealed in my tomorrow. I am a pioneer of my own generation, carrying the fire of the Restoration into the dark. I do not fear the cost, because I know that the one who called me will sustain me through every mile of the journey. I step into the water with a quiet heart and an unshakable resolve. The path is set, the light is clear, and my foot is on the road. This video uses AI-assisted narration for educational and devotional purposes. Historical content is sourced from verified Restoration history and the recorded teachings of Joseph Smith.